Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth and last open mic of 2024 here in the wonderful Novartis Pavilion. And we have gathered again a really wonderful speaker panel, and I'm looking forward to an insightful discussion on the state of the integration of health tech in clinical trials. My name is Rael. I am working for Switzerland Innovation Park, Basel area. We are hosting this event series. Switzerland Innovation Park, Basel area is running an office co-working space on the Novartis campus, building up a health tech community here on the Novartis campus. Where actually this event series is curated by Day One Healthcare Innovation. But before I welcome Ursula on stage, director and moderator of today's session, I would like to take the chance to also welcome everyone who joined us online. And to mention that we're using Mentimeter as always. You will see the QR code on the screens. You can take a screenshot and then join the discussion, send in your questions, and then we will make sure to mention them afterwards. And of course, during the Q&A session, we will also go around with the mics, so you can raise your questions on site. But now I would like to welcome Ursula on stage. Ursula, director of Day One. Over to you.
So, thank you, Rahel, and welcome everyone. So for those of you that come regularly to our open mics once a quarter, you might start to get tired of my face here on front and on the stage, but I hope you get to enjoy the session today. I have three wonderful speakers with me, bringing very different perspectives to the topics of clinical trials, and I hope by the end of the session and following at the apero, there are some nice discussions on how can we optimize clinical trials by the use of health tech. So please, Poorya, Mara, Ieuan, join me on the stage. So thank you for joining me. I think the audience might want to know a bit more about you and why we chose you and why clinical trials is important for you. So Poorya, if I may start with you, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Poorya Amini. I'm the founder and CEO of the RiskClick. The story behind company is coming from my own pain when I was working in the CRO and responsible to develop protocol for biotech medical device companies. And we developed one protocol that took us 12 months with a lot of key opinion leaders, and I was really proud of myself that this is going to change the guideline. And we started the study. After 5 months, we had 5 amendments and had to stop the study after a year because of the lack of the funding and behind the milestones and all these issues that you know. And then it was a really big disappointment for me, and that was the point that I was thinking there should be a better way that we do the clinical trial and protocol development. Therefore, we came up with a solution called Protocol AI. It's an AI-based software for developing clinical trial protocol and study documents and help the companies to reduce the time of their protocol development by 50%, implementing that and accelerating their clinical trial protocols.
Thank you. Really looking forward to learn and discuss a lot more about it later on. Mara, back to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ursula. Thanks to Novartis and Day 4 as well. Very glad to be here. My background is in clinical operations. I lead studies at Roche. And I had the pleasure to join the Roche Digital Innovation Lab for about the last 2 years, where we really try to bring in open innovation into Roche. But first, we started connecting with really the problem that our teams were struggling. So we really looked into solving problems and not just trying to sell something to them. And that's how we started collaborations. So really my passion lies in bringing technology and innovation into clinical trials, looking at how we can really make trials faster and get to the goal that we all have to get faster to patients.
Thank you so much, Mara. And Ieuan, what about you?
Thank you. Yeah, so I actually started my career here at Novartis. So I was very lucky many years ago to be chosen to be the data analyst on what we would now call a digital trial, but back then we didn't even have a word for it. It was one of the first trials at Novartis that included a sensor, and the clinical leads didn't know what to do with the data, and so asked me if I would like to take part in that, and it sounded interesting, so I did. And one thing led to another, and eventually I was then tasked with building up the digital endpoint group in translational medicine, which is part of the early clinical portfolio here at Novartis. And that was, a great experience, and certainly learned a lot, and certainly started to understand many of these pain points. But I felt at some point that I needed to broaden my horizons, and so for the last sort of 5 years I've been working for startup companies focused on digital evidence development, currently at VivaSense, where we work across different therapeutic areas helping pharma sponsors implement digital sensors into their trials.
Thank you so much. So different perspectives from big pharma, from protocol optimization, from sensor integration. So I'm sure we will have a great panel today. So you touched on pain points, so I'm gonna pinpoint on that. So what is for you, if you could only choose one, because I know we are gonna touch several today, but if you could choose one pain point, so I believe all of us here in the room are aware of the potential of optimizing clinical trials. Most of us might be very aware of how expensive and how long it actually takes to bring a new molecule, a new drug to the market. So depending which report you look at, we are at about 2.5 to 4 billions to bring a new drug to the market. And that might be my personal experience, but it's probably the only industry that I know of where with a 1 to 2% success rate of bringing a molecule to the market, we can still make it. On the other hand, we have the potential of health tech. We see the big boom of AI, even Gen AI, if you allow me to now use what became almost a buzzword, right? But Gen AI with a lot of potential savings, but we don't see that happening much yet. What is it, the biggest pain point, the biggest limitation that you see?
Yeah, from my perspective is the complexity of the clinical trials, because there is a lot of report and publication that shows that the complexity of the clinical trial is increasing. Mm-hmm. And designing a clinical trials is getting more complex, there is more variable, there is more stakeholders, even accommodating all this technology for the sake of the trial optimization is becoming a challenge. Of course, maybe we all know, that we have a solution how to optimize the clinical trial from different perspectives. But how put all this perspective together and optimize the clinical trial, I think still is a challenge. And we need to work and require a lot of collaboration from the stakeholders to work together to see how and address the challenge.
I agree. It really is getting more and more complex, and as you said, studies are really showing that, which is also what has a great impact, of course, in our costs, right? The way they are exploding and increasing. And if I look, Ursula, because you said, what is the one factor in clinical trials, right? I think it's time, really. So for me, everything translates sooner or later into time, right? If we could really accelerate the time that it takes us to bring a molecule to the patients, then we're going to have less costs, right? We're going to probably have better recruitment experiences, right? Better retention, and all of those things that are not working so well today have an impact on time and obviously on costs, right? And this is what takes us to the success rate that you mentioned and that we were discussing today as well, right?
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, great point, and I think it really speaks to this pressure to innovate. And I think for me, this is something I see a lot. That on one hand, people recognize these facts, right? You know, the industry is under a lot of pressure. ROI is getting a bit spicy, you know. But and on one hand, there is a lot of interest and willingness to innovate and so forth. But at the same time, it's still a regulated industry, and budgets are tight, and so we somehow end up in this situation where there's a lot of interest to innovate, but to actually try something new and validate it and actually see if there is a return and if it does help, if it does speed things up, and that's often a really real, you know, a genuine challenge to actually implement and get beyond idea pilot to something that's actually validated. And making that jump is incredibly hard in an industry that is regulated and is under so much pressure to achieve that primary aim of, as you say, advancing the intervention. You know, clinical trials are not built for innovation. They're built to progress drugs, and yet we're trying to innovate in that environment.
Thank you. I'm going to take on that. So clinical trials are not made for innovation. And one of the things we very often see is innovation happening more or being better accepted in the commercial space or very, very close to a molecule or a drug launch. That's when I'm taking your words from today, Mara. That's when suddenly there's a target. The sales team is like, oh, how are we going to reach it? So we need to innovate. And that's where we see a lot of this innovation happening. But actually, that's kind of too late to make a real impact. When we believe this innovation should be kicking off is much earlier in the process, probably around phase 2. Like, what are your takes on that? And why are we not seeing too much innovation that early? Is it just clinical trials are not designed for innovation? Are there other factors there that play a role?
Yeah, in my opinion, I mean, for the pharma company, I think clinical trial are one of the most important parts of the operation and the core business. And also, as Ieuan mentioned, is highly regulated with a lot of regulation, external regulation, and also internal SOP process and regulation. And innovating in such a sensitive area, which has a lot of regulation and process in place, is a little bit difficult, I would say. And on the other hand, for the company, which one of the most important section is the clinical trial, doing innovation need a lot of de-risking and thinking to ensure that, okay, if I bring an innovation, don't disrupt the current process that is running anyway, is going. Maybe with low efficiency, but is running. And on the other hand, that ensure the compliance with the external regulation, compliance with the SOP, with process and everything. And at the end, it's really time consuming and resource intensive if you want to innovate in the clinical trial area. That's why we see less innovation in the clinical trial space in the industry rather than the other area, as you mentioned, the marketing side or commercialization and so on.
Can I play a little bit the devil's advocate?
Please.
Look, yes, you're right. And yet, I wonder this double moral that we have, like, meaning in a business where the success rate is 1% to 2%, how much worse can innovation be? Right? Why are we so risk averse about innovation if we are in a business that fails 99% of the times? And yes, it's an industry that is very regulated, but look at finance, look at banking. Everyone today has their bank accounts in their phones. why there is nothing like that for the pharma. Why? Why we have a piece of innovation from a tech giant like an iPhone, why there is nothing comparable in pharma? And I ask myself always this question, and a lot of you that have a job in the pharma, you don't need to answer, and also for you online, but really, with a hand on your hearts, is it really the regulations that make your life so complicated, or is the construct that the teams made out of those regulations? I many times said that it's like we built a room, we will build the walls of what we understand that the regulation was meant to be. And we kind of grow up within those walls. And nobody, or very few people, have the courage to even make a hole on the wall and ask themselves if that is still valid, or maybe the conditions change, and maybe we interpreted that right, but back then, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and today we have other tools, other technologies that make that rule something that's obsolete, right? So I'm like, yes and no. I think many times we use regulations as an excuse because it allows us to keep ourselves in our comfort zone, and we don't need to explore beyond.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I'm from the startup side. I wish we could innovate. We could do a lot of piloting experiment with the pharma. And one thing maybe is just imagination, or maybe some pharma companies start doing that, is that to build a sandbox, to build a playground for the new innovation, new technology, not to bring it to the core business, not to put additional workload on the people, but having really a dedicated team that can test the innovation very fast and then do a proof of concept or piloting. Still doesn't address the problem that Ieuan mentioned, that's moving from a pilot to rollout. This is challenging, but at least can address a part of the challenge, to have really a sandbox that you can play and see, okay, if that generates a value for the core business, okay, then how to plan to integrate it in the whole organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, is also a bit about incentivization, which I think is what you're talking about, in the sense that there are actually very few people at a company like Novartis who are actually incentivized on the success of a drug. Most people, their goals and promotion opportunities and so forth are handed or are hooked onto onto performance, but in terms of, yearly milestones, transitions in a drug's life, but, you're not necessarily feeling responsible for the big picture. And I remember a few years ago, this was a big theme at Novartis, certainly, and there was a lot of talk about different parts of the process being siloed, and this sort of comes to the situation that you were pointing to, that, we've been working on this drug for years, it's finally on the market, and now we're thinking, okay, but what can we do for labeling claims? And that lack of a joined up thinking and lack of overall incentivization, there was a lot of initiatives that went to try and push back against that. And this was something that in the scope of sort of digital endpoints is something that we tried to address, in the sense that we started this idea, or we didn't start the idea, but we implemented the integrated development plans. So every asset had to have a plan right from the start all the way till the market of what are you going to do. And so at least that if I'm doing, early clinical development for a particular drug, that there is actually a market for it, and that there's somebody in commercial who would be excited about that progressing. And we added in questions there around, have you thought about alternative evidence? What are you planning for your label claims and so forth, right? And at least it meant that people were thinking about it right at the start, but it still didn't really address the challenge that you talk about, that at the end of the day, you can just say, no, I'm going to do it like we did it last year, and I'm going to take no risk.
Yeah.
You know.
Maybe, Ursula, to add to that, I was last week at the Global Innovation Forum in London as a speaker, and there was somebody presenting this fight that we have, right? This maybe this gap between the perform, like really the KPIs, what you need to deliver on, right? What are your goals and what is your target and what will allow you eventually to advance your career versus the transform, right? And it is in the transform where we have room for a playground, for an arena, for innovation, and yet whenever there is a reorganization, the first roles that are gone are the innovation roles.
Maybe I'm going to touch a bit here because this is a fact I think especially people local here in the Basel area, we are very aware of these transformations going on, not only here globally, but we are in the room mainly here, right? And we see that. And it's very difficult sometimes to see how to best structure innovation. We have spoken about the sandbox, about these innovation teams, and this definitely supports at least MVPs. So I think we have become good in the last 10 years of getting to MVPs, but we still fail on how do we really integrate it in the core business. So how do you think, or what do you think is preventing this moving really into core business? Like I think each pharma has done hundreds, if not thousands of pilots around, right? What is really preventing going into the core business and being rolled out company-wide in a large pharma?
Yeah, I think one point that goes with Ieuan mentioned that this is the holistic view of the innovation, because I can just share my experience. I mean, our solution has a lot of aspect angle beyond protocol and other documents. And I was talking to one pharma companies, yes, you can also integrate the whole study plan generation based on the protocol. And the guy from the innovation team told me, look, I don't know who is even responsible for this document. That completely makes sense. Even we are talking about the innovation team in the large pharma. And said, yeah, that completely makes sense for me. But still, I don't know who is responsible for this piece. And then for now, we cannot do anything about it, while it completely makes sense to do that, because then we need to find the person that is responsible. And then, yeah, I don't know in practice it's possible to do that or not because of the bigger scope of the topic. But at least somebody at the innovation level should have the holistic view of the organization and then delegate the piece to each person. But in reality, if it's possible or not, I don't know, that's maybe just my imagination.
But I think I've certainly seen different models. I think what you're talking about is where you have an innovation team, which is great because there you have people dedicated towards thinking about these things. But then right from the first step, you have an issue because they themselves are not well integrated. And I think we've seen a number of companies around digital innovation have, a digital office or a digital health function or some iteration of that, and they themselves are separate from the core business of running trials. And I think we're now seeing more companies integrating those teams better, and where you're having people with specialist knowledge and with specific incentivization, but who are actually part of those core functions and can support those core functions to do their key objectives and advanced trials, but at the same time buffer that additional burden and risk, which is just the reality when you're trying out something new. And I think that's probably a more effective model to have those integrated teams. But again, it requires on a corporate level, we're saying, okay, we're going to take a certain amount of our resource and dedicated to this particular function. And that takes a vision, and what do you want to achieve with it, and where do you want to innovate, and how are you going to judge the success of innovation? And these are all big questions that need to be really thought about on a company level.
So going back to the success of innovation, right? One of the things that is often or sometimes hard to measure is how do you prove before, so especially when you come from a startups, right? How do you prove beforehand the value that you can deliver, right? How do you have examples? Do you have stories of the potential that there is and how these conversations go?
Yeah, from our perspective, yes. I mean, there are some things, especially on the quality level, there is no metrics that you can measure it. Yeah, of course, everybody understands with this method you can increase. Everybody appreciates that and can evaluate that, for example, increase the quality. But at least we didn't find any good metrics that you can measure the quality. And quality is one of the big factors for us that we can increase the quality. But on the other hand, we go again with the time, what Mara mentioned, because this is the essential things about the clinical trial. Everything should be in a time. Because if we can reduce the time of the trial, is to the benefit of all the stakeholders, not only the companies. The patient can receive faster the new medication, new treatments. Maybe at the end it's going to be cheaper because we spend less. I'm not 100% sure. But at least what I believe that, yes, that can be shorter. And this is the metrics that we use to show, okay, we can reduce the time. But often, especially for, startup, this is challenging to show that, because you need to show it in a large pharma environment. If you show it in the biotech, okay, it's completely different environment, maybe it's not valid for the pharma. And then willingness to collaborate with you and allow you to show it even, this is sometimes is really, really challenging. But at the end of the day, I think, yes, it's important because it's important for the decision makers and to see the value and then make good decisions.
Oh.
Okay.
Yes, that's a question for you guys. It's a startup world. So.
I mean, in the evidence world where I come from, typically success is gauged, I would say, in two buckets, let's say, and I'm saying this not just because Steve's here. So one is really when you're running a clinical trial, you have a kind of a set menu of evidence tools available for you. If your drug improves mobility, or improves depression symptoms, there are only a few ways that you can actually measure and show that. And that menu is actually quite small. And so for many new drugs, we simply don't have very good evidence tools. And a big part of what we're talking about as patient centricity these days is identifying gaps between how we are demonstrating that a drug works, whatever works means, and how a patient would like to see their life improved or what they're worried about and so forth. And those gaps offer a genuine opportunity for digital tools and health tech, right? We can develop new tools that actually from the ground up are addressing those gaps. And that's really important for a drug company because it's about regulatory success. And all regulators have been very, very clear that they want to be, they want to have a clear demonstration that the lived experience is being improved, but actually demonstrating that is challenging, and technology offers us a great opportunity to be able to address that. And so there is that regulatory success aspect, and there have been a number of case studies now where regulators are accepting for the first time evidence derived from sensors and technologies that are speaking to these aspects of their lives. And then the other bucket is really efficiencies. And this is purely statistically driven in the sense that if you have a technology, whether that's a sensor or something on your phone, that's measuring a particular symptom every day, just the fact that you are repeatedly measuring something, statistically that drives a certain sensitivity. And with increased sensitivity, you gain efficiency in your trial. You can see effect sizes sooner because you're reducing your variation. And so either you can have smaller trials or you can make decisions sooner. And this efficiency argument has also been quite well demonstrated. So there was a recent paper from Tufts where they had looked at trials that had used technologies in trials alongside traditional evidence sources, and it basically showed that there was maybe a 1 to 10% increase in efficiency in terms of being able to make decisions earlier. And those sorts of efficiency gains are really critical for pharma companies where you're looking at like an EBITDA multiplier. So the value of the company is typically around 12 to 14 times their overall revenue each year minus all your operational expenses. So that means any increases in efficiency, you're directly making a saving for that particular trial because you're making a decision slightly earlier. But for the business as a whole, you have a huge multiplier of that in terms of the actual business value. And those sorts of arguments are increasingly gaining traction in the field. But we're still waiting for this killer application where we actually have a drug approved based on sensor evidence. We've had a number of close calls, but unfortunately those drugs have not worked out. But it is a matter of time. That's something you just simply can't account for. If you can really sensitively show that it didn't work. It's sort of we're waiting
on the
for
1% success rate. So we only need a few more.
But that's that's a normal part of the research that we're doing, and I think it is just a matter of time before we make that breakthrough, and that you have a digital endpoint used as a primary or secondary that supports market approval.
I think so. We touched a lot on the efficiencies. I loved that we brought patients into the conversation. Thank you for that, because they are a key element and a key part of clinical trials. One of the challenges on clinical trials is actually patient recruitment, and that's something that we know we struggle with, or clinical trials struggle with. There are multiple applications working to improve patient recruitment, but still, as Ieuan said, like no killer app there as well. Where do you see and how do you see health tech affecting or impacting these areas specifically?
Do you want to go first?
I can. Thank you. I think the problem of recruitment is like many other problems that we were mentioning here in pharma, multifaceted. So it has really a lot of factors contributing to that. For recruitment, I think there is also a cultural problem. Like certain populations, for example, in the US, right, or certain group of patients simply don't have access, right, or are not aware of the possibility of participating in a clinical trial. And even if they were, they would not have the means, right? So it has a lot to do with awareness and education and possibilities, like really possibilities translated to really the day-to-day logistics, right? Where maybe the centralized trials can play a role, right? Or wearables that monitor the patient at their homes can play a role too. But for me, it's like all of these solutions that you are mentioning are targeting like only a very small amount of the patients that are out there, and they are almost always the same type of patients. So that's also why we are not successful in diversity and inclusion, because the patients that even think about participating of a clinical trial are still very few, very little amounts. And we have all of these other universe of patients that we are not reaching in any way. And there are a lot of factors there. I remember, for example, one of the startup companies that came to the InnoLab last year was saying that women, for example, take more than 80% of the decisions related to the health of the different members of the family, right? And that's a very hands-on example. If you are a mom and you have children in different ages and need to make sure that somebody is going to pick them up and need to go to your chemo, to the hospital for the whole day, need somebody to take them to football or take them to swim or take them back and, you know, organize lunch and so on. There are so many logistical factors. And the problem is, like in many other things, there is no one solution for all. There is no one solution for streamlining innovation and concentrating innovation in the pharma or for decentralizing it. There is no one solution for decentralized trials or really trials the old way and the old model to do everything at the site. You have to be very, you have to customize very much, and that adds complexity.
How?
Yeah,
Good
I mean,
AI.
we are more in the study design and planning. I can talk more about that aspect because we talk about the patient centricity, but we were discussing before, we are not even touching that. Despite a lot of talk, conferences, and so on, that we are talking about the patient centricity, but we don't see any action, we don't see any solution that really bring the patient. And especially, I think it's really important, first of all, to start with the patient and bring the patient to the design of the study, because at the end they're gonna use the medication or drug that we develop, and they know the best. They know the best the pain. Maybe you need to guide them regarding the solution and possibility, limitation, and so on. But they are the one that they are live with the pain day to day. That's why they are the best people that you can involve them in the design of the study. And if you can involve them in the design of the study, I think in the future, I mean, when it's running, it help you also to be a participant of your study or ambassador of your study to speak out to the others, patient groups, community, and so on. Yeah, I was engaged in this study, and so on. Yeah, I think we are not there. I mean, what we are trying to do, and I really hope that we get this solution done. Hopefully, maybe by May next year, sorry, next year we can launch it. Is that we are trying to bring easy solution to patient to participate in the design of the study, because this is really challenging. Yes, everybody talk about, but how we want to bring it without how you want to manage all this operation, how do you want to manage all the feedbacks, how do you want to explain them, even what is the study about, and so on. That's why if we want to start with the patient centricity, we need to create a solution to bring more patient to the design of the study. But of course, this continue until the and then also in the operation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of nice examples of how co-creation does lead, as you say, to increased retention, ultimately better data quality, because as you say, you are identifying and addressing hurdles to participation that otherwise you're just kind of steamrolling over, and then shouldn't be surprised when, the working mom can't come to the hospital visit as scheduled. You know, it's sort of, it's not a one-size-fits-all model, as you said, and I think that's incredibly important. And I think it's also, in very small aspects of the protocol, not just recruitment, right? I mean, that's a big theme, right? Trying to understand why people take part in research, why they don't take part in research, what are the specific hurdles that they face, and what can we do to go out there and, provide value to them such that they would be motivated to take part and take away those hurdles, right? I mean, I think this is sort of starting to blossom, but I think it's also in, as you say, very small parts of your protocol as well, in terms of, your individual site visits, right? As you say, a patient is already living with the burden of their condition. You're then asking them to do all of these tests, maybe to travel, to fill out these questionnaires and so forth. And so what can you do to make that as smooth as possible? And I think this is, again, it's part of listening to them and making them feel heard. And, again, it increases the motivation to take part in research, right? That you are giving them value and treating them as a partner, not as just part of your end.
Yeah. I think, at least from my experience, when you are designing the study, you are really into your study. And then sometimes you go and write your wish list that you want to collect all the data for a lot of sub-study, another study, you are thinking about the future and so on, without thinking that is it really feasible for a mom to bring it there to do the visit or not. And that was exactly my experience that I told you regarding the study that I designed when I was in the CRO. Because we designed the study to collect the blood from the patient 24 hours, 48 hours, and 72 hours after the operation. And then our endpoint was linked to the 72 hours blood. And then after 20 patients, we realized, okay, we don't have 72 hours blood. And then we start calling the sites, why we don't have a blood, this is really important, this is for endpoint and so on. They told us, look, our standard practice is that after 48 hours, the patient discharged, and nobody come back just to give us the blood, drive 4 hours or 1 hour to give us the blood for 72 hours. And it came. Of course, we discussed to a key opinion leader and said, yeah, the best time point would be 72 hours and so on. But nobody realized that after 48 hours, they get discharged. Because we didn't talk to patients, we didn't ask, we didn't talk to doctors, we didn't talk to nurses, and then we just sit in our silo, develop it, and we thought, okay, we are the best, and run.
And I wonder, Poorya, I wonder if our mindset is not part of the problem, if our beliefs, because what I always see is we always talk about the patients, about them, there.
Yeah.
And we are all patients. Like either we have a condition, or we had a condition, or we will have one, or we have a loved one going through something, or we're part of a society, right? And the society needs to bear with the cost of medical coverage to everyone. So I think part of the problem is really that we are seeing that as something separate and not really embedding ourselves with the problem, because I believe it's different that if we were to think about the challenges from the perspective is how would I like it, or what would make my life easier, or what would it make it impossible for me to participate.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this is also sometimes, it gives also the feeling to the patient that we are in a two separate side. You are here, I'm here, and this is, if we can make it more collaborative, that try to gather their idea, then they have a brilliant ideas that they can add to the project, and at the end is to benefit of all, as I said, would be amazing. But so far, yes, I see this approach. Even when we try to engage the patient and ask the patient, we usually organize a meeting. They are sitting and then try to ask them a question and answering to collect this feedback. Maybe this is that's give them the feeling, okay, is on the other side, you or me, while the solution that I see, at least from our perspective, is that they should be engaged from the beginning, that we design the study through the whole process, because this is anyway is a long process, an iterative process, and needs a lot of optimization from both sides.
So we have touch.
But I think there is an issue around implementation as well, right? I think in the sense that, I think you touched on it earlier, right? There's a lot of will, but putting into practice is different. And I think if you look at a tech company, for example, like we talk about health tech, but if you really look at like a tech company, their product development department is packed full of qualitative and mixed methods researchers who are specialized in robust research of extracting these sorts of insights and synthesizing them and making that and moving away from that transactional relationship, because they want a product that really works for the people who are involved in it. And at the end of the day, a trial is a product in that regard, right? You're asking people to interact with it, but inside of a pharma company, those sorts of skill sets are not common and are certainly not concentrated on this aspect of the problem. And I think that, having more involvement from people coming from that side of research, I think would also really help and bringing that perspective in as well.
Love the potential power of collaborating, right? So we have touched a lot of topics around clinical trials, from gaining efficiencies, gaining time to go to market, about the complexity of trials increasing, collaboration between startups and pharma. We touched topics around patient engagement, but we have seen a lot of challenges until now and a lot of things. So I want to put you back on all these years that you are in clinical operations, in clinical trials. One example that you think, oh, that was a pretty good example of something that actually worked. Oh.
This is hard to find. I think, I see one of my former colleagues there. That was a project that we did it when we were working together. And that was a small project with the agile team that everybody were super engaged from the beginning, and they could work together hand to hand, basically, and then address the bottleneck, the challenge very fast. And at least, this was the example and I think the success came from a really close collaboration, understanding, and having the same incentive and goals that everybody had, not have a different incentive in the team. And this alignment of the incentive, goal, motivation, and so on, I think that's at least made it a good example for me.
Could you maybe, if possible, give one example of the outcome that was achieved, or one outcome that was achieved through this great collaboration?
We completed the study on time, first of all. It goes to the time. Everything for us is the time. And it was a successful trial, actually. And then they communicated the result to the patient. They invited the patient. Afterward, they presented, because then they could involve the patient also in the study design. They were following up the study. The retention rate was high. And then afterward, they organized a meeting with all the participants. They presented the result. It was really, cool atmosphere, and to me was a success, at least.
One good example from you, Mara.
One example that worked is we used to have this monthly meetup open to everyone here in Basel, and really we had many different companies joining that. And there was the University of Basel coming there, and they have an exchange program with Seoul. So they have students from Seoul here from some time, and then some students from Basel over there. And there were the startups from Seoul, so we invited them to one of our weekly sessions to present their startups at Roche. And one of the people attending that session was actually from our early phase research department, and they were looking at possibilities of predicting how molecules would survive treatment with heat, right, for quality purposes. And actually a collaboration started there. They signed a CDA months later, but eventually they did sign a CDA. They developed a model, a prediction model, and in the end, the amount of data that was available at that time was not enough to prove or to fully validate the model, but they continued the collaboration, and eventually, when there is the amount of critical data necessary, they will move on. And maybe another one that is in the making, is still very early, but we used to have these cubes where you put 5 students into a cube made of glass for 5 days and 5 nights. So they are really there, right? In front of building 1 was last time there, on the street, basically. They can leave the cube to go to the toilet, of course, and to get a shower, but other than that, they are there. And they were tackling a problem for one of our products that we have on the market, that is a product to treat an ophthalmologic disease, and it's injected on the eye. And as you can imagine, right, the amount of patients that drop out because it's a monthly injection in the eye, so not something that you're looking forward to, and it prevents the progression of the disease. So you really cannot tell that if you would not receive the treatment, you would be worse, even though that's the nature of the disease. But there is no a real benefit that you can see. And so they work very closely together. I think that's key. With the clinical development teams, and out of there came a startup, and they are now working on putting a clinical trial to test the solution they are developing. And hopefully more to come next year.
Okay. One great example from you.
I think a recent big milestone for us is we do a lot of work with the Rett Syndrome Research Trust. This is an advocacy group that represents parents and patients who are living with Rett syndrome, which is a rare genetic disorder primarily affecting young girls. They are more or less normal till about 18 months and then enter a regression phase where they lose autonomic function, which sort of materializes as they start to develop like repetitive hand movements, they struggle to breathe, they get digestive issues, everything that the autonomic system impacts. And being a rare disease, there are just no outcomes, so drug development in that space is incredibly difficult. But over the last few years, there's a lot of hope through gene therapies, and there's actually a number of companies now developing very promising interventions in that space. But again, proving that they work is challenging because there simply aren't any outcomes. And so we've been able to develop some collaborations with the Rett Syndrome Research Trust and with some of those drug developers to actually build new outcomes based on technologies that are co-designed with the parents, because obviously these are pediatric patients, so it's not straightforward to collect data from them. But we wanted to develop better methodologies for really understanding what they're living with. And we now, just a few weeks ago, had our first meeting with the European Medicines Agency to move those outcomes forward towards qualification, which is a really big milestone, and it means that those outcomes are now ready for all of the companies that are developing drugs in that space to use and to advance them. And we certainly see it as our first step. It's just one. We're focusing on breathing dysfunction at the moment, and there are many other symptom groups that we want to address. But again, it's about making that first step and hopefully building momentum that then other people want to be part of.
Thank you. So I just wanted to have a bit of hope that there are things actually happening despite all the challenges we have talked about. We got a lot of questions from the audience. So I'm going to start shouting some of them for the rest of the audience here in the room, but also online. You will get the code through the screen if you haven't scanned it yet, so that you can still submit us some. So I'm gonna start with the question on endpoints, because we touched it, but we touched it very high level. And this question is, have you seen examples of clinical endpoints used and tested at early stage prior to phase 2 and then following the development of a molecule? Like, do we have examples of endpoints that have made it through?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and again, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier about trying to find a space for innovation, and again, a lot of people really start thinking about this at phase 2, phase 3. Once things really get serious and all the rest of it. But actually, the whole idea of an integrated development plan is that you're thinking about your evidence strategy right from the start, potentially at sort of phase 1 or running phase 0 studies. And this can be extremely valuable in de-risking what you're then implementing into your protocol at later stages. There's already enough pressure in a phase 2 or phase 3 setting. You don't want to be experimenting with the right technology at that point. You need to really know what you're putting in your protocol and why, and ideally also have the validation data to be able to already begin your discussions with regulators about the kind of evidence you're going to be presenting to them later. And I think there are a lot of very nice stories of teams that have done that. I think I could definitely give some kudos to my former colleagues at Novartis. So there's a couple of assets at Novartis now in late stages in the tendon regrowth space and also in the depression space, where teams very early on were running these parallel studies to work out the details and generate that early validation, really just proof of concept, but it means that you're having a much more data-driven discussion with the study team at phase 2, phase 3, and those assets are currently still progressing. And so I think, those are some really nice, there's some really nice examples out there.
Thank you. I'm gonna take on the data because it's also related to one of the other questions, and the question goes around how challenging it is to unify global historical clinical trial data for analysis, and how long can it actually take?
Yeah, this I can really talk about it. Yeah, it took us 4 years. Now I know how long does it take. Because it's really challenging. We have a lot of data regarding the clinical trial data, but they are really scattered over different platforms. We have some data in some registries, we have a FDA data, we have a guideline, we have a standard of the care, reimbursement, safety, and they are really scattered in different platforms and different organizations basically taking care of this data, and most of them, they have a different format. And that's why it was not possible to connect this data easily, and took us 4 years to collect all this data from all the sources and then do a research how to connect this data and develop a model that can automatically keep this connectivity of the data, because there is more and more data coming in, and then how to connect this data. But
if not anything to that, I'm gonna bring in another question that came into the topic, and is, if we do all this effort, it takes us that long, are we actually gaining full insights from the data that is generated, and if we can see value on this data beyond the clinical endpoint.
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity for a lot of insights beyond that. And I think some of it we are seeing in real-world data and real-world evidence studies. But I think that the data issue is a huge issue that we have. You were saying, Poorya, about the different institutions, maybe, no, that you need to tackle, right, to obtain that data. But you can see the same at pharma level, right? Within a pharma company, like you have information about a molecule in vitro, in vivo, in animals, right? In your phase 0, in your phase 1, and it's all, you have a clinical study reports, but it's all in different systems many times, right? And it's not really information that talks to each other. So for me, this is one of the big things that we need to tackle in order to really make use of the technologies that we have today. Because yes, AI and the hype and ChatGPT and we all heard that. But really the use of those tools in our day-to-day relies on the quality of the data and the access that we have to it.
Which I totally agree with that, because there was a time that everybody talked about the big data, and so on. Now completely changes about the quality data, because if you have a high quality data, you can do many things with that. You can train a model, you can do many things. But having a big data without the quality or not a linked data and so on, basically at the end, even if you develop a model, the performance of the model would not be, even you use generative or any technology, at the end, it lays on the quality of the data, which, yeah, I completely agree.
There's a lot more questions coming from the real world data as well, but I don't know if you want to add something more. I can read some of the questions, but more on how can we make better use, how can we...
Of real-world data specifically. I mean, I think we are getting better and better at it. I mean, this year we saw the first market approval of an oncology drug based specifically on real-world evidence. That's the first time that's happened. And it shows how much more connected these systems are becoming, and you know, we are able to do it. And I think, again, it also kind of, you know, one of the bigger advantages that you get from that kind of approach is really, you know, it is literally real world data, right? So, you know, you are, rather than trying to take a trial paradigm, which is very homogeneous, you know, you're pre-selected individuals, you're, you know, and all the biases that we talked about earlier, you're more coming at it from the other end, and you're trying to see actually where you are seeing an effect and for who and in what way. And I think we're going to see more and more in that regard, as, you know, in terms of, especially in terms of like off-label usage and so forth. But, you know, it still doesn't necessarily help us get genuinely new entities onto the market. But I think people are thinking more and more about, once I get to the market, how am I going to justify the value, you know, beyond, let's say, simple mortality? You know, how am I going to talk about quality of life for those individuals and justify, you know, that price, let's say, in terms of label claims? And I think that's where we're really seeing a lot of progress at the moment.
How open are regulators in this space?
I mean, very open, right? I mean, but at the end of the day, the regulators can only respond. Like, you know, they are, you know, they've released a lot of guidances over the last couple of years, you know, encouraging this and opening pathways. As I said, just recently there was the first approval based on RWE. You know, there's a lot of guidances around what kind of evidence they would consider in terms of diversity and representation and so forth. there's a lot of companies working very hard to try and connect those systems better and to enable this kind of work. So I think the regulators are absolutely ready. They are asking for this. They are aware of that power. But as I say, they are reactive. We have to come to them. They're not going to develop the drugs for us.
Just to add to this, recently the FDA also released the quality by design guideline. And this is going to quality by design guideline to integrate the real world data, real world evidence into the design of the study until the end. Yeah, I completely agree that they're ready.
So I see different questions coming on. You gave a lot of examples, but where specifically in the whole clinical trial process you see the biggest potential or the biggest gains from bringing technology?
I can speak from my side, but this is biased for sure. What at least, what we could show with one of the pilot with a large pharma that showed that we could reduce the time of the protocol development by 50%. And implementation of the protocol and document to start the study by 40%, and putting all these numbers together, they estimate that they can be at least 1 year faster to market by accelerating the design and implementation process. This is, from my perspective, but then I'm sure that there is a lot of opportunity in the operation also, that we can streamline the operation and make it more efficient until the evidence generation, until the submission, and so on and so on. And the good point is that at least that there is a lot of initiative and activity in the FDA, that they are trying to also accelerate from their side and make it with a digital protocol, digital submission, and everything. And I think there is a lot of room for optimization in the whole process.
And I think that's part of the problem. I think it depends is the answer. And it depends on what is your goal? What do you want to achieve? Because you cannot tackle everything. Yeah. And you cannot, have an MVP for absolutely every use case, right? Because then you get scatter all of the way, and you never have the power or the lessons learned or the tools developed that much that you are really able to scale that up, right? And that is where we fail a lot of times in the pharma. That scale up is really, really hard, because we also need customization, because the countries are different and have different medical systems, right? And have different languages as well, and different regulations to some extent. So I think it depends, really.
You're biased, I'm also biased. I still really believe that the evidence tools that we have an enormous amount of improvement potentially in them. They're just simply not very efficient. We're the way in which we're gathering that evidence. Obviously, yes, there is the practical considerations, of how we're implementing our protocol and training our sites and so forth, but the instruments themselves are not very performant. And I feel like that really goes to the root of the problem, that if we can make them more efficient, then the whole machine will be better.
And maybe if I can add, Ursula, an example to that. So I see a lot of platforms or ideas trying to be developed in the sense of, for example, site selection platform, right? And then it is always, okay, you input, this is your disease, this is your protocol, this is your phase, whatever this, and you get an output eventually, okay, these countries you can go to, right? These sites you could go to. But then we don't go for those. Or we go for a mix of that plus what somebody else tells us, or what we have to, right? Or the key opinion leader that we have to put. So we, in a way, you know, we interfere with the output of the model and make our own then in the end say, okay, look, the performance was not so good. Yeah, but the performance of what? You know? It's you make the Frankenstein and then you complain.
Yeah. No, it really is true. It really makes me laugh. So many times we've had clients who don't want to make the financial investment but they want to be innovative, so they want to censor in their trial. But they want the cheapest possible sensor. So they take the worst option, which then doesn't work, and then they say, well, digital evidence doesn't work. And it's like, well, you know, it's sort of, people are somehow happy to spend 80% and fail than 100% and succeed. And, you know, we sort of we're saving in the wrong places somehow.
We could keep going for at least another hour just by looking at the questions we have here, but it's time to wrap up. So I'm just going to take one more question, and then I'm just going to close with one very rapid one from myself. So there is one on, there is health tech in clinical trials now for many years, and we're still not there. So what is the one thing we should be doing different now? You go.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk from the startup perspective. I think, yeah, all these initiatives and things takes time. And there was a lot of initiative that was running out, the standards was going on and so on. And now, I mean, now I think it is a good time because there is a lot of standardizations is coming from the regulatory perspective, from a sponsor perspective, and so on. And also the level of the technology advancement is really high at the moment with all, I mean, generative AI, other AI, and non-AI technology that exists, that we can put this in place. And maybe I'm really optimistic and naive, but I'm really believe that yes, in the near future we will see the change in the way that we do clinical trials, because there's a lot of pressure also on the industry to be more productive. From pressure from the regulatory side is coming more and more, and hopefully from the society also there is also more pressure coming that demand and pull more innovation. And then I believe, yes, in future we have a better, shorter and safer trials.
So before I go with my very rapid closing question, I just want to thank all the audience for all the questions that you have sent in. And there are two topics that are repeated that we just don't have time to cover. One was on in silico clinical trial arms. The other one was going deeper and deeper into the topic of patient inclusion, patient retention, and topics around patients. Steve, you're going to excuse me, but for those in the room today, have a Steve Burke from Personal Pulse. I think I can say here he has done fantastic things to bring patients into clinical trials. So people in the audience that really want to discuss around these topics, I'm sure the panelists are happy to. But I would like to point out to you as well, because the work you have done is fantastic. So big recognition from myself personally to you. And the other around in silico clinical trial arms. We have a whole apero, and I believe that's a topic we can discuss with a glass of wine, because there's quite a lot. But I'm sorry, we have to wrap up. And I just want a very quick question, just very, very quick, because we are beyond the time. So it's the last open mic of this year. So in a few weeks, we are in 2025. What is the one thing you believe we will see happening in 2025? One change that you expect to happen next year that we are going to see?
from my perspective, the digital protocol will happen next year.
Good. Looking forward to that.
Yes. I don't know if we were gonna see it, but it's my wish, and it's more collaboration.
First drug approval based on a digital endpoint.
Simple.
Good. So letter to Santa sent.
Have you done so? Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for your time, for your answers, for your honesty. I think we need sometimes this conversation just to bring the topic, and really happy to continue the conversation on the apero. Handing over to Rahel again.
Yes, thank you very much. Also from my side, Ieuan, Mara, Poorya, and Ursula, thanks so much for sharing your expertise. I don't want to keep you much longer. If you work on campus, if you're interested in what we're doing as Switzerland Innovation Park on the campus, feel free to talk to me or check out our website and get in touch. Then I'm happy to announce that we will have another set of open mics next year. I think we have a slide on that. Yes, exactly. So the first date, mark in your calendars, the 24th of March. We'll probably start communicating about a month beforehand. So keep your eyes open. And with that, a big thanks to Novartis for sponsoring this event series. We're very happy to do it. We're very happy to be in the Novartis pavilion. Looking forward to next year. And I'm inviting you all now to join us at the apero and continue the conversation. Thanks so much for being here.